Okay, so this is just part of our sort of introduction to the course, and certainly for the external students particularly, but for everybody. These are a couple of the students, recent graduates from the undergraduate degree who are moving on to a higher level study. So this is Danny, who's going on to a Masters of Philosophy, so a research Masters, as is Tate. But they're doing quite different topics in different parts of the world. So I'm going to ask them a couple of questions about what they remember from AR1001, and then I might ask them a couple of questions about what they remember about AR3501 for you guys, so we'll make this available for both classes, and then a little bit about what they're doing for their research project. So you can sort of see where we can go with archaeology if you are excited about it, but also just thinking about what the sorts of things that we do study here at JCU. So whether you're a keen archaeologist or not, you can think about the sort of things that are happening here. Hopefully it adds to your life in general, even if you're not going to be an archaeology major student. Okay, so we'll start off with you guys. What do you remember about your AR1001 class?
Want to go first? I remember doing squares, so doing squares in the ground for excavation. No actual excavation, just doing the squares for them, using a dumpy level, and also like drawing small diagrams and things within the square. So some basic fieldwork skills.
Yeah, so that's a part of the course, is to try and through the practical classes, or the practical part of the course, is to try and give you a bit of an idea of the practical side of archaeology, as well as what you can read in the textbook.
So I remember that it was pretty broad, and it talked about archaeology all over the world. It went in depth pretty heavily on Asia, which is an area of our specialty here at JCU, which kind of leads into the next class, the 3501. But there was also some interesting facts from the later portion of the class. I can remember vividly a lesson about Aztecs and some really fascinating
Toltec
history
and
sacrifice and really strange but fascinating topics. So I can really remember that stuff. That sticks.
Okay, and for you guys, when you did AR1001, was archaeology something you were going to do? Did you decide to come into archaeology after AR1001, or did you already have that as a plan?
Yep. So I was actually going to do education, and I was currently in IT going to do education, and did AR1001 as a fun subject just to do that was nice and relaxing and interesting. And I thought, gee, I really love this, and I did very well in it, so I thought, forget education, I'm going to do archaeology. So that was my little shift aside.
Okay, that's good. So we like to steal students from other parts of the university if at all possible.
Yeah.
So I was a little different. I left school with the idea of doing archaeology. I liked the past and history, and archaeology just gave me that hands-on aspect that I feel like history lacked. So I've always been gunning to do archaeology, and then doing AR1001 just solidified that idea. I was tossing up a little bit between anthropology and archaeology, and ended up doing a double major in both just for my undergrad, but really solidified my interest in the archaeology side of things.
Cool. And you can see our lovely microphone as a trowel that we're using today, so it's good. We'll have a trowel talk episode 1. Well, maybe that we'll think about that. Okay, so we'll come back to AR3501 a little bit later on. I guess, is there any particular advice about getting through AR1001, and what you remember about making sure you get a decent mark and those sorts of things?
It's going to be very varied in that you'll have lots of archaeology. So you'll look at hominins to begin with, and then you'll go into actual human settlements and domestication of animals and wheat and farming, and then you'll go into empires and states. So it'll go the whole sort of gamut from human sort of occupation of the planet sort of thing. So it's quite varied. So if there's one area you don't particularly find interesting, there will be something later down the track that you will find interesting. It's quite broad.
As a class, it's really helpful for the rest of the course as a whole if you continue on with archaeology classes, because it is so broad. You talk about all those aspects that will later be covered more in depth. So I tried to not focus on the really specific details and just get a broad understanding of what archaeology is, what the past looked like, and how humanity as a whole has developed throughout the ages. And this class is perfect for that. It shows you that pretty well.
Yeah. And then as you go through the course, I think you'll find that the essays and the exam in particular, there'll be a fair bit of direction as to how you can specialise your study for particular topics in those assessment pieces. Okay, now tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, what you're starting out with this year in the Masters of Philosophy.
Okay, so I'm doing a Masters of Philosophy in Archaeology, and I'm looking at doing it in Historical Archaeology. So what is Historical Archaeology? That's archaeology that involves historical documents or written actual history alongside it. So colonial history in Australia would be one thing, and that's what I'm looking at, is how did early European pioneers in Australia create an economy from the ground up? So did they go into agriculture, pastoralism, and what decisions did they make? How did they go about doing it? What were the challenges, and how it sort of evolved over time? So how livestock changed over time, how farming practices have changed, and the impact on that upon society and what we can see today.
Okay. Yep.
So my area of focus is Southeast Asian archaeology, and specifically in Laos. So there's this one site in Laos that we've done a fair bit of work at, and JCU has. It's called the Plain of Jars. So my focus is to recreate the stone jars, the production process to make these megalithic structures found throughout this particular region in Laos. So I will be taking an experimental approach and performing the production of the jars as a whole to see exactly what toll it took on the workers, how long it took, what value these jars have to the people in an economic sense, and then I can elaborate on a social and a ritual sense to see how important these things were. And then we can answer some of the numerous gaps in our knowledge regarding the Plain of Jars as a whole.
Yep. And some of you would have, in the lecture, they might have noticed, you might remember that I said we might be looking for some volunteers for Tate's work at some stage as well, with appropriate safety gear and various other things for chiselling and carving sandstone and maybe even some granite around as well. So both of you have carried on into the Masters of Philosophy, so it's a research degree, writing a large research thesis around a single research project, and you've come from honours in Tate's case and
I've come from a graduate diploma in my case. So my first degree was actually in journalism, and then I came back to university to do IT, then maybe education, as I talked about earlier, and I thought, no, I want to do archaeology. So because I already had a degree, I could go straight into doing the equivalent of honours, which is the graduate diploma. So if you've been doing something different, you can actually move into archaeology.
Yeah, excellent. And and I think in both cases, in the graduate diploma and in the honours, you had to do a smaller research thesis.
Yes.
And your Masters of Philosophy project has sort of grown out of what you did in that smaller research project in that first degree, in that second degree, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And what else can we ask about? So let's go back. So I know. So for Tate, you did AR1001. It's about the development and the change and stuff through complex societies, through early states and civilizations, whatever those terms might mean to you. And we concentrate obviously in Asia because that's where I do most of my work, so it's easier and it's more interesting for me. But we could look at we could look at other parts of the world. So for you, did that help you to decide to work in Asia, or when you first started an archaeology degree, did you think you might be working in Asia, or did you have any other particular ideas?
I originally had in mind the very, I guess, I don't know if I'd say it's a traditional idea of working in the Middle East, but whenever you think of archaeology, you think of Egypt.
Yeah.
So I had that in mind originally, but as I kind of did the classes and looked at what was available to me, the opportunities in Southeast Asian archaeology are just extensive. And there's so little known about the region that there's so many areas you can look at and you can try and develop ideas for exactly how processes happened and it's so varied across Asia and Southeast Asia. Everything's so, it's very complex, but it's very fascinating as well. So that class really helped and solidify my idea.
Yeah, and obviously we had the opportunity through the New Colombo Plan. You came on excavation in Laos, so that would have helped to. You've got some experience in the area, and that might have helped you as well, perhaps.
Definitely.
Yeah. And Danny, you stayed in Australia.
Yeah, so I still did my projects in Australia.
Yep.
So I looked at the colonial history sort of thing, again, historical archaeology. So I looked at a series of hotels that sort of come out from Townsville and go into the hinterland and connect into cattle properties. Purely because one was sort of very close to my backyard and I was interested in it, and no one had actually researched into that particular area before. There was a gap in the knowledge there, and I thought, well, I can sort of fill a gap in that knowledge, and it's sort of in my own backyard almost. And I found that just very interesting to me to look at that. But for the actual subject, AR1001, it did help me sort of understand archaeology a lot more. It gave me more of an understanding of hierarchical societies, how things have changed around the world and in China and Asia. And you can sort of look at that framework and you can apply it to other areas of the world too, how it's very similar in the Middle East and in Europe to different emergence of these state societies.
And of course, the emergence of those state societies leads to the colonisation of places like Australia and New Zealand, where I'm from, and the Americas. And so there's that interaction between those that long development sequence towards state societies in the old world, in Asia, Europe, those sorts of places, and then kind of a imposition of change in the colonial world, which is rather different. Okay, so I think we'll stop there for now. Unless, do you have anything else to say about 3501, about maybe assessment or what you kind of got out of it, I guess, in particular? And
I think it's really helpful to show. Originally, with 1001 kind of shows you how places develop, and then AR3501 shows you how places develop differently. So that was a really key idea that comes across, because you look at a variety of different areas throughout Asia and Southeast Asia, and you can see them developing at different times, in different orders, and it shows that it's not such a fluid transition from ages. It's very much a very complex and interconnected change between Iron Age, Bronze Age, all those different ages. And that class was really key for me to understand exactly how varied those changes can be.
Yep. And the world that we live in wasn't a fait accompli. It wasn't destined to happen. There's a whole lot of different interlocking parts which have led to where we
I think for me, the AR3501 helped with the theory as well, like looking at, say, a burial and seeing there's someone buried in there and they've got some pots. Maybe they were a potter. Well, again, that's your personal bias, because you assume pots in a grave, there could be a potter, but then the dead person didn't put the pots in there. Someone else did. So it could mean anything else. It could mean that they were a chief or something else. So it sort of helps out with your theory there, thinking about what you find and what it could mean. And that could apply in all the different sorts of places around the world. So Viking burials with female bodies with swords in there, is that a female warrior, or is that a female who was of high status who had swords put in there because they were of high status? And you could debate that. Just something to sort of think about with that subject that helped with that understanding.
Great, cool. Okay, thank you. So we will, you'll see these two later on in both videos for both classes, as again demonstrate some of the practical skills.
How to do a square.
Especially how to make a square, but we'll do some other things as well.
A squared equals C squared.
Yeah. So maybe if you're looking at this now early in the semester, go and look up what Pythagoras' theorem is again, and see if you can remember how that works. It's useful.
It will help.
It's a very useful tool in archaeology. But that is it for now. Thank you, and we will move on to something else.